And so really what we want to do today is have a session, especially when Dr. Danny spoke quite a while ago. One of the things in my engagement with him was that he actually said that he does this mental health training for leaders, especially in churches. So, so hi, Dr. Danny. Great to see you.
Hi, Cheah.
Yeah. So thanks for being available, Danny. He's been really kind. He actually offers this to churches for free and stuff like that, and it's his own time recording, all that kind of stuff. So we're super duper appreciative of what you're doing to help the wider church. So he's from Numa Church, and he's done this session for their leaders as well. And so we just really want to thank you for that. Yeah.
Thank you.
Now, just really quickly, so just want to kind of share a little bit about why we're doing this, then we'll go into the practicalities of it. As most of you know, like this mental health will become a much more prominent issue. It is a growing issue. It'll become a much more prominent issue. I think as lockdown kind of restrictions lift, you kind of see some of the ramifications of that more and more, because some of it will be in silence. So I just think it's just a very seasonal and time appropriate for us to be able to address some of this. Now, many of you guys know with Wei, she was a GP, and when I had to deal with some mental health cases over the last few years, over the years of pastoral ministry, it can be really, really stressful. Especially when they kind of send a text and go, I want to kill myself or something like that. I mean, that's the extreme side, but there's a range of it in the area of mental health. There's a spectrum. But what's really challenging is that what do we do as frontliners? It's one thing to go refer them to, to see a GP or to see someone specialized. But then it's another thing that we have to deal with it from day to day, front facing it. How do we put boundaries? How do we self-care? How do we have conversations around it? What's the appropriate time and season for us to refer? Like all those questions, I had Wei to help me navigate through some of that. I've done some mental health first aid training and stuff like that. But it can be really stressful at times. So while we want to be helpful for people, we need to be equipped to be able to help them well in such a way that it's wise, but also life-giving for us and for those involved. Yeah. And oftentimes when that's not done properly, we can get a lot of compassion fatigue. It's like a no-go zone. I've been burned by this before. Let's not go there. But God's got a redemptive heart, and I think redemptive for you as frontliners for us, and also for those who are going through it. And hopefully this will be helpful for you, even as spouses. Some of you guys might be going through this mental health, and how do we help one another? Hopefully this will be particularly helpful for you. Yeah. Now, I just want to shout out the Embrace and Empower Ministry. They're also holding sessions. Danny's going to be speaking in Empower, and then we have Dr. Judy Wilkie. She's fantastic as well. She'll be speaking for Embrace. But even though it might seem a lot, but I think it's just prevalent. It's a timely seasonal topic, and so it's important for us to be engaging with that. So just to go through a bit of some logistics then. Basically, Kyle will be co-hosting with me. Sharon's going to be playing the technical host, and then we're going to try and make this as interactive as we can. And then Danny will kind of break his session into two bits. The first part, and in the middle, Kyle will step in and then facilitate something, and then we'll have the second part, and then we'll have a bunch of Q&A questions. Now, so if you want to write your questions along the way, please type it into the chat, and then we'll kind of triage those questions. I would just advise if we can kind of respect people's, if you want to give a particular specific situation, respect people's privacy as well as you share. But we want to be able to speak to specific how-to questions. So the questions that we want you to be able to focus on is not the conceptual thing like what's the role of the church in mental health, none of that. It's a bit more like, how do I do this? Like real hands-on practical questions. So we wanted you to focus your questions in that direction. Okay. Awesome. Okay. So otherwise, let me hand the ball to Carl.
So you want practical questions. So like one of my workmates shares that she cries a lot. She recently shared in public that she's crying all the time. If you listen to her sermon, so like, how should I approach that and care for her? That's the type of practical questions you're looking for. Yeah. By the way, I'm just making a joke about Sharon's sermon. You should go back and listen to it if you haven't already. Yeah, so we just wanted to start off the session with a bit of a poll. I know that some of you are watching this probably on a device that maybe you're not able to answer the poll questions. So if you're not sitting near your device now, would be a good time to actually come close to the screen, because I'm going to load up a poll onto the screen, which is just a bit of a baseline poll to figure out where we're at as a group. Again, if you can't answer it because of just what you're watching it on, that's right, don't freak out. But yeah, we're just going to kick off the poll now. It should be popping up on your screen. And I should say also that the poll is anonymous. So whatever you answer, even I, as the host, can't see who answers what. But it is just 6 questions that goes through, I guess, where we are at as a group of people. And that sort of helps us as the leaders get an understanding of where everyone is. So for those of you that are looking, the first question is about like your age demographic. The second question has to do with how often the issue of mental health actually comes up in your groups. The third question is about practicing self-care, identifying boundaries, comfortable having conversations about mental health, and then also about knowing your role in helping people. So there's 6 questions, and it won't take really long for you guys to answer. I'm assuming it should be up on your screens if that is correct.
Yeah, that's great. Man, I'm now in the 40 to 49 category. What's going on?
Yeah, yeah,
That's
I know,
so
it's not...
sad, man. Sorry to those who are between
The
40.
further you have to scroll down to find your age, the more sad it becomes. So yes, feel free to start voting on that. That would be wonderful if you could do that.
So can everyone actually see that poll, like move, Kyle?
They should be able to. At the moment, it's not saying many people are voting. Could you give me a wave if you can't access the poll? Yeah, if you're not able to access the poll, give me a wave. Otherwise, I'm assuming people are doing it.
Right. So this helps us gauge a little bit, like really how prevalent this issue is in our community as well. Yeah.
Awesome.
Well, Carl, what happened when there are 3 of us?
3 of you on the same device?
Yeah.
Average age.
The most authoritative person in the room is allowed to vote. Whoever holds the most authority in the relationship votes.
Is that why Margaret's pressing it?
Okay, just answer it.
But look, this isn't like, say, a scientific gathering poll. This is just a general baseline of like, hey, this is where we're at as a group of people. And I'll give you maybe another 2 minutes to do that, if that's all right.
Yeah, because I think question 2 is interesting, right? We've got at least just 50% fairly often and all the time. So it's, you know, it's a reasonably prevalent issue for us. Dr. Danny, can you see the poll as well yourself? Yeah?
Yes, it's great. This is really helpful.
Great.
Hey, interestingly enough, Cheah, I cannot see any of the results, even though I'm the host and started the poll, but it sounds like you can.
Yeah. Okay, that's good to know. I can't poll it, but I can see it. Yeah. So I'll speak to it. So large, in terms of the demographics there, but in terms of current issue, so how often does the issue of mental health arise in our social and ministry circles? I would say 53% fairly often and all the time.
Wow.
Not very often is 43, 4% never. How often do you actually practice self-care? Never is 0%, which is good.
Yes,
I'm
that's
really
good.
glad to hear that. Seldom, which is still pretty high, 42%. And then about close to 60% often and always. Yeah. So hopefully that will be helpful to be able to provide some of that principles around that. How confident do you feel identifying healthy boundaries in pastoral care? About 37% says fairly confident and very confident, and 64% says sort of confident. How comfortable and confident do you feel about having conversation with people in their mental health? You know, more than 50% say not very comfortable or sort of? And how comfortable do you feel knowing what your role is in helping people, knowing what you're expected to do? Again, yeah, about 50 or 60% kind of say sort of confident. Yeah, that's great. Yeah.
Awesome.
Okay.
All right. We've just got maybe 20 seconds left, and then I'll close the polls in case there are some people that haven't voted, as we're just finishing up now. But we do appreciate that. I guess one of the things that we are quite wary of in terms of like the leadership team is that we don't want to be asking leaders to do things that they are not equipped to do. And so things like this poll sort of help us understand like what people feel comfortable and confident doing, as we don't want to ask people to put their necks out into places that they don't feel like they're equipped to actually do what we're being asked to do. All right, I'm going to close the poll now, and I appreciate that. We will be doing a couple more sort of question times during the session. But yeah, that's really good to know. Thank you, guys.
Okay, great. Well, okay. Well, thanks for that, Carl. And hopefully that was helpful to give a snapshot about where we are as a community of leaders. But why don't I just handball it to Dr. Danny? So thank you.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for having me again. And thanks, Carl, for the poll. I think this is really helpful to get us started, and it helps me to really read the room, because obviously we're not meeting together in an auditorium, for example, and just helps me just to know where you're at. And thank you for inviting me back. Sorry, the poll keeps popping up on my screen.
Sorry, hopefully that will be gone now.
Okay, sorry. Yeah, so thanks for having me back. Clearly, the first talk wasn't too offensive, so you haven't been able to kind of have me back. But I just need to say, although I'm speaking for the men's event next week, my running joke is that because I'm single, I'm actually better placed to be speaking at a women's event rather than the men's event. So just for your planning for next year, just thought I'd put that out there. Look, I'll start sharing screen and start speaking from that, because I think it's better to have something visual on the slides that helps to prompt the conversation, and hopefully the slides will help you to remember some of the things that we're going to be speaking to that we should be more useful than my face. I use a hashtag called "Don't Just Pray It Away" in a lot of the talks that I've been giving in churches, really to do a couple of things. One, to encourage people to seek help when they need to for physical and mental health reasons. And the second thing, really, it's a reminder for us as Christians to about our responsibility, our call into discipleship that includes walking people through a journey in their life rather than at a conversion point. So that's just, I guess, just trying to explain the context of this hashtag that I use and taking lots of the talks that I give. The green ribbons represent the campaign for mental health awareness. Just so you know, yesterday was World Mental Health Day on the 10th of October, and this is Mental Health Week. So this is a really timely place to kind of have this conversation and this platform. We know that 1 in 4 people suffer with a mental health condition sometime during their life, and in any given year, 1 in 5 Australians struggle with a mental health condition. So really, there would be 1 in 5 in your church currently struggling with a mental health difficulty or problem, and possibly even 1 in 4 would have had an experience sometime in their life. So it's actually very common, and it's not surprising that we're paying a lot more attention to it, particularly given the issues of the pandemic. But the issues of the pandemic have highlighted the mental health needs and the increased needs in the community. But actually, this has been an ongoing issue for quite some time that has gotten a bit more of a profile, sometimes for political reasons, but certainly it's been in the forefront a lot more. It's in my conversations in different contexts. This is an issue in different cultures, different countries, across different denominations. So it's not something that is confined to a particular age group or a particular culture or a particular time. And perhaps in the past, people have not spoken up about mental health. One of the common myths that we might have is that, you know, we use this term like mental health issues are on the rise, but actually what we do know is more people are speaking out and speaking up and getting help, rather than necessarily a true rise. I would imagine that there would have been a lot of people that would have had mental health problems that have been suffering silently. So it's the reason I'm emphasizing this is it's important for us to take hold of the narrative and not to get caught up in the panic that, oh my goodness, this is a disaster and mental health issues on the rise, but in fact, really acknowledging that the needs are there and that more and more people are speaking out and using this narrative to actually send the message in a positive way so that people actually feel more comfortable about getting help for mental health reasons. The other thing, I guess, in terms of this talk is it has been shaped by conversations with other pastors, life group leaders. I do get phone calls from my church pastors and leaders around troubleshooting some mental health concerns in the congregation, but also in working with some of the church that I used to attend back in Malaysia, where I'm from as well. So some of these conversation material has been shaped by that, but also it fits in with what's provided through a standard training called Mental Health First Aid. So I guess I'm putting a bit of a Christian context and application to mental health first aid, just to give you a bit of an idea of the talk today. It's really important for us to set the context right in this conversation, particularly in the church context, in terms of why are we here together. And we're here because of what Christ has done. The reason that we have communion is that every time we gather and come together, we remember his sacrifice, his death on the cross, which gives us our purpose of coming together. And also it gives us the hope of why we come together, and that hope that we have in God and in Christ, in eternal life, it's what sets the meaning and context of our purpose of dealing with these mental health issues. So I think this is particularly important because this isn't just another social group. We are here called for a specific purpose, and why we want to do this and love people is not just because we're nice people or that we're kind people. We are called to community through a covenant, through our relationship in Christ, through what he has done for us, through the restoration that Christ has brought to us. So I just really thought it was important to start the conversation with that context. And this really is a picture just so that we don't get a COVID fine for holding each other's hands, because we're really meeting in a virtual platform. Someone actually asked me, because one of the key ingredients in terms of dealing with mental health issues and suicide prevention is actually connection. Staying connection is the one thing that helps to prevent suicide worldwide. And obviously there are lots of different interventions and programs that are being delivered, but the key theme, a thread throughout all that is actually connection and staying connected with people. Even getting help from a professional, it's about staying connected with help with a person rather than the tricks of the trade, so to speak. Someone asked me, what about online platforms? Does it actually work? I guess we don't know. We know that there may be more research done in terms of comparing human connection face-to-face versus online, but this is the best that we have at the moment, given the limitations. And it's really important that we use whatever tools that we can to stay connected as a community for each other as leaders, but also for the people that we try and help and serve in a day-to-day basis. This is not a pyramid marketing scheme. It's just a very simple traffic light system for us to think about our role in terms of where we fit as Christian leaders, pastors, connect group leaders in terms of mental health. Looking after mental health is a shared responsibility between the person, their family, their network, their community, as well as professionals, health services, and so forth. So mental health isn't about coming to see someone like myself alone. It's about the things that we do together as a society, as a community that provides mental health support in lots of different ways. And so it's from family connections, the things you do week by week in terms of your church life, your connect groups, your church meetings, formal and informal conversations that you have, the catch-ups, family gatherings, traditions, going to school, going to work, joining in sporting activities, and a whole range of different things that really form the foundations of mental health. So that's the green kind of zone that I'm talking about. And from time to time, there might be different mental health needs that might come up. For example, when people go through life transitions, stress, exam stress, moving from one place to another, significant life transitions, the death of a loved one, issues with employment, financial difficulties. There's so many different things that exist as part of the ups and downs in life. And as a church community, we are actually very well placed to support each other with the day-to-day life transitions and issues. So certainly from that base point, mental health support, all of us here in this room have a part to play in being able to support each other, support the people that we love, and support the people that we're called to. The next step in the pyramid refers to mental health professionals such as someone like myself, a GP, a counselor, a psychologist, psychiatrist, there's occupational therapists, social workers. The list goes on. There's a whole range of different people who have specific training in terms of mental health, and we are equipped to deal with perhaps more severe and enduring difficulty due to the specific training that we have. But in order for me to do my job well, it relies on the person having good community supports. I see a lot of people struggling with mental health issues that come to see me, but what's also happening for them is, whether it's both a cause and effect, that the mental health issues have also contributed to a sense of isolation, disconnection from their community. And sometimes it could be that the disconnection has contributed to the mental health difficulties, but also having mental health difficulties make it difficult for someone to connect with their community and to do the things that they want to. So it has a multi-directional kind of impact. And particularly in our society, we can get very tokenistic in the way that we talk about relationships and connections, saying, "Oh, come along, come and join me, come and join my club," and we are open and accepting, and we take anybody. And then when someone comes to the group that kind of has additional challenges or might be different, then sometimes we may be, as a general society, might be a bit reluctant in terms of embracing people for who they are and the struggles that they're going through. And this is where the church is well placed in terms of being able to be inclusive and being able to support people, as well as being part of the community supports. And the church has always done that through the centuries. And the third part of the pyramid is the times when we actually need to use emergency services such as the police and the ambulance due to issues when there's issues around safety or risk or violence that may be connected to mental health issues. So I would also rely on emergency services. I guess I'm very mindful of where I sit as a mental health professional in this network, being able to stick to my lane, do what I do best, but I partner with people through the church community. I partner with a whole number of organizations. I also use emergency services when I need to. I'm not responsible for all of mental health care, just really giving you an example of perhaps how I might fit in and how I use different parts of the system working together. And I just wanted to kind of perhaps talk about how this shapes our role as a church community. In terms of where do you go from green to yellow is that kind of tricky question, and it's such an individualized experience, and it can be quite difficult to just have a very blanket rule that everybody who has these issues must do this. It's a bit a lot more gray than that, because we're dealing with people's lives and story and experiences, and also perceptions and preferences. So there's a whole range of different contexts that we need to take in account. But I'm going to speak to some general principles that may help us. So typically when there are mental health issues, it would affect our thinking, our behavior, and our feeling, to the point where it affects our ability to function. So not just having issues that affect our thinking, behavior, and feeling, but it actually is impacting on our function. So our relationships, our ability to study, work, and be able to do things that's expected of us as a society, whether it's also ability to kind of perform in ministry as well. And the other key point that is helpful is perhaps there's a significant change that is enduring. So not just having a tough time for a day or a season, but really, particularly when it has been going on for quite some time. And other kind of warning signs that are really helpful is when it significantly affects our sleep and appetite, because it's not just affecting our thinking, behavior, and our feeling, but it's actually affecting our functioning to the point where it's affecting our basic functions to survive, like eating and sleeping. So those are some general principles that can be helpful as a bit of a guide to kind of go, oh, maybe it's worth kind of moving from the green zone to the yellow zone. Now, sometimes we may not be sure, and sometimes it is helpful to seek the advice of a mental health professional just to have a checkup, just to get some clarity around, well, I've got these issues. Going to a mental health professional does not mean that you're going to be diagnosed with a mental health problem. It just means that perhaps there are some things that might trigger some interest, get you to kind of get that looked at, and they might offer an opinion or some practical help, and then you may be able to continue on or perhaps have more ongoing support. Very similarly, if we had perhaps a health problem, that's we got a lump on our neck, for example, we're not going to sit and wonder, are we going to get help or not? We actually go and get it checked out. And sometimes we get it checked out and realize that, it's not something major. Then we can perhaps do some over time that sort of resolves, or we may need more specific health intervention to deal with those problems. Similar, to use that analogy in mental health, seeing a mental health professional is also about kind of getting perhaps some advice or check to see to help clarify the issue a little bit further, rather than expecting people in our primary supports to always be equipped to be able to tell all the differences. I think in the green zone, our role is to support people in their day-to-day lives, help them feel connected, preserve people's dignity, look beyond the problems in terms of being able to understand who they are and be able to support them at that level, perhaps hear the stories. And it's often in the green zone that people have the most trust. And through that trust, be able to support people to actually get the help that they might need. So that would be, I guess, some principles around trying to perhaps tease out whether we may need to kind of deal with it at a different level. And I'm happy to take some more questions later on, because I think there are a lot of different applications for this as well. If you're like me and you have a very short attention span, and that you maybe have, I've lost you already in terms of listening to a talk for the last 10 or 12 minutes, this is probably the time to hone in, because this is probably, if you don't remember anything else on the talk today, this is probably this one thing that's going to be the most useful and the most practical. I always use the analogy that, when you board a plane, and actually, I might need to find a new analogy because we're not boarding a plane for a while. But we go to the safety briefing. We get told to, if the oxygen mask drops from the cabin ceiling, that we need to kind of put the mask on for ourselves first before putting it for the person that we're caring for. And this applies to so many areas in ministry, in helping people, in any kind of profession that is involved in terms of looking after people, whether you're a healthcare provider, a mental health clinician like myself, or a support worker, or a teacher, or a parent, any kind of role that involves looking after someone else. It starts from, first of all, looking after ourselves. And it's not being selfish, it's actually about being wise. And we all have different self-care things that we do for our self-care, whether it's about having our own quiet time, being able to do things that we enjoy, being able to have time that is separate from the things that we are constantly giving to, like our ministry and our family and various other things. And self-care is a huge part of, I guess, not just refreshing ourselves, but also this is where we connect to the source for our ministry, which is the Holy Spirit, in terms of both from a spiritual and a psychological and a physical perspective. Personally, one of the things that I've been really trying to learn and put into practice this year is actually in the area of practicing the Sabbath. It's very difficult in ministry, in the busyness of life that we live in, and particularly if you're volunteering as well on your weekends on top of working and other things, it's really difficult to maintain that rhythm of the Sabbath. But the Sabbath isn't just about refreshing and regeneration. It's also God's way in his design to tell us he loves us even though we don't produce anything. On a day of rest when we don't produce anything, he loves us just the same as when we're winning souls for him all the time. So I think we can do a lot. You can really, you go to Google and you look up all the strategies and self-care. I encourage you to do that. There's some really helpful tips. I've got some handouts I can share as well in terms of some self-care tips and looking after your mental health. But one of the things that I find really important is in terms of, it goes back to the source of our identity. If our identity is very much tied up in what we give and produce, how big your ministry is, how many people you help, how many people you pastor, how much time you give, then it can actually make it, that can often be a barrier towards actually making those choices around self-care. The barrier to self-care in terms of the difficulty in putting into practice actually isn't about time and pressure. It goes back to what is attached to our identity, and being able to be clear about that helps us to be more released and more free to be able to do what God has intended in his design. This is an iceberg. Obviously, it's a bit of a visual reminder for us to think a bit about what's on the surface and what's underneath, both for ourselves as well as the person that we're caring for. For the person that we might be caring for, that or might be leading, often they may be presenting with a whole range of different challenges or difficulties that are on the surface. It's really important for us to not just deal with the things on the surface, but to tune into actually what's underneath the surface. So for example, the things on the surface can actually be overwhelming because there might be things that we may not be able to have all the knowledge and information for. So we might be presented with certain medical or psychiatric issues. It may be things like self-harm or suicide that we may find a bit overwhelming and so forth. It's really important to remember all those things that may seem very complex and difficult have actually some underlying issues and themes that actually are quite common and quite simple that we can tune into and we can help. So the things that are on the surface that people struggle with when they have mental health issues in their thinking, behavior, and their feeling could be things like, feeling anxious, feeling depressed, feeling that it's hard to cope, worrying all the time, having difficulty sleeping, and so forth. But the symptoms or the problems that are on the surface are actually not just problems, they are a form of communication. So if we understand that all kinds of mental health challenges and difficulties are forms of communication, it helps us to then be able to be more empowered to be able to deal with what the issues might be underneath, apart from obviously seeking professional help when we do need to do that. Now, when I say that it's a point of communication, it doesn't mean that the person is deliberately deciding to communicate in this way, but often those forms of communication are perhaps unconscious or subconscious. But underneath that point of communication, the universal theme that I think comes up over and over, it's about things like wanting to feel loved, wanting to feel like you matter and that you are significant, to feel like you belong, and to experience dignity and respect and value. So feeling loved, feeling that we belong, and to be able to experience respect and dignity and value. So if we can tap into those three areas under the surface, that can be a more effective way of engaging people rather than trying to solve all the problems that might arise on the surface. The other area that I want to kind of get into is looking at kind of healthy boundaries. I know Pastor Cheah preached on a message on boundaries. I think it was a couple of months ago, and it's really helpful to maybe also go back to that talk, because I think it goes into a lot more detail about boundaries in relationships, particularly in terms of looking after or caring for people who may have mental health difficulties. The boundaries goes along with the self-care. If you're in a place where you are practicing good self-care, having a clear identity around your role, it makes it easier to actually set those boundaries. So for example, in my day-to-day job, there are certain boundaries that I set that helps me to do my job well. For example, I choose not to take home, I don't do a lot of the work outside hours. There are other systems in place for that. I understand my role within the system. I also set some limits around how much time I spend with each person so that I can help more people, but also being able to make sure that I stay as effective as possible. So the boundaries can come in terms of perhaps financial boundaries, boundaries with our time, and also boundaries with our perhaps our emotional kind of state in terms of how much we might be giving, or how deeply involved that we might be in. So those boundaries there are a few things that guide that. One is something that you decide as an organization, as a church, as a group, as what Pastor Carl said, in terms of not expecting volunteers and leaders to actually deal with things that a professional should be dealing with. Could be one example of a boundary that you might be setting as a group. But in terms of individually, those boundaries may also depend on the person's capacity. Some people do have a bit more capacity to manage certain things more than others. So it's important to be able to know where your boundaries are as a group, but also individually. And what helps to know why it's important to know those boundaries, because it really leads to my last point before we have a bit of a break, is that if we don't practice self-care, understand what the underlying issues are, and be able to also set healthy boundaries, this leads to burnout. Some of the signs of burnout in ministry would be, one of the early signs is actually exhaustion or compassion fatigue. It gets to the point where you start dreading helping people. You're not your usual self. You find this exhausting. Someone calls you for help, and you kind of immediately in your mind, you kind of go, oh no, not again. That's an early sign of compassion fatigue. It's not that you're not a nice person, it's just the nature of perhaps feeling exhaustion. And this is a very common experience that I experience as well. And I have to watch, because those are perhaps my triggers in terms of knowing perhaps where my early signs are of burnout, and to make sure I set, and that could be perhaps a gauge of where my limit might be in terms of setting those boundaries, that I can't do more. I need to kind of step back and rest and do my self-care to then be able to look after someone else. So I think burnout's really important, but particularly in ministry, because we're here to last a distance, and it's a marathon rather than a sprint. And I think sometimes we can just go all out because we're on fire and want to do all the right things, which is great. But it's really important for us to last the journey and last the distance, because I've also seen some of my friends who have perhaps struggled to last the distance because of actually the giving of themselves without kind of the other aspects that I've spoken about. I've also met Connect Group leaders who have quietly decided to quit Connect Group leading. And one of the issues is because they're finding the emotional burden of Connect Group leading or Life Group leading too much. But it's really difficult to say that. And often people kind of perhaps pull back from wanting to do that. So I actually have experienced that myself. One boundary that I have set for myself, because I work in mental health in my day job, I have deliberately not taken up pastoral care or Connect Group, Life Group duties. I volunteer in other areas in my church, but this is something I deliberately have decided, although I would also love to be able to help people in connect groups and so forth, but this is something that I have decided, and different people might have to kind of make their own decisions through your leadership around where you kind of best fit in terms of making sure that we all last a distance. I'm going to stop for now and perhaps hand this back to Pastor Cheah and Pastor Kyle.
Thank you so much, Danny.
Yeah, no, I think that was really fantastic. So yeah, sorry, we'll hand it to Kyle. Yeah.
Oh, that's right. Yeah, no, thank you, Dr. Danny. That is fantastic. I think that if we were gold miners, our bags would be full because of all the nuggets you were dropping. Yeah, that was fantastic. I took a whole lot of notes, but I thought what would be actually quite useful right now is often when you're taking in a whole lot of information, it's easy for your brains to get a bit full. And I thought it'd be really helpful for us to actually share a little bit about some of the things that have jumped out to us. And so if you're able to actually get to the chat room, the chat function on the Zoom, that'd be really good. If you could just chuck in a couple lines of things that you have found that were really helpful just in this section. So things that I would put in the chat group right now, when Dr. Danny was talking about connection is a key theme to helping mental health and preventing suicide. Like the fact that when he had that triangle on the screen, the fact that the low level part of the triangle is actually probably the most important part in dealing with mental health was really something that I needed to be reminded of. Just the community support and having connection and people around you was really, really important. That was a good thing. Another thing that I would have chucked in is also that self-care is not a selfish thing, but it's actually a wise thing. There's lots of other things that jumped out at me, but I think it would be really cool now if we could just take a few minutes to jump on the chat function and start writing in like a sentence or so of things that have jumped out at you so far, just to share with everyone else.
Yeah, so this helps us process. That's great. The iceberg analogy was great. It's more helpful to look at the issues beneath the surface. That's great. Thanks, Joe.
Yeah, and I think a few of you, like, where was it? I think Anthony Pease and Evelyn and maybe Dawa and Sharon have all sort of mentioned that thing where Danny talked about the Sabbath as a bit of a reminder of that, yeah, God loves us even when we're not producing something. I'm sure if my microphone was turned on, you would have heard me exhale a whole lot of air as if I'd just been sort of punched in the sternum. That's just like a real reminder of what grace is really. This sort of, we're undeserving, and we often put so much identity and value in what we produce. And when we can't produce, that really shakes who we are. And I think that's probably something really worth actually noting and bringing up, because we are in a culture where our identity is in what we produce, what our capacity is, what we study, what we bring to the table. So that's probably something definitely to keep lodged in our minds and hearts.
Yeah.
But yeah, not succumbing to compassion fatigue. Really good. Don't just pray it away. Yes, for sure. There's some really good stuff in here.
And yeah, I think there's a lot of references to Sabbath, and I want to kind of share this because this is the kind of stuff I try and practice myself as a pastor. It's one thing to know how to set boundaries practically, but you got to ask yourself, why is my heart not allowing me to set those boundaries? Which is what Danny's referring to. And a lot of that has got to do with identity, control, and all that kind of stuff. So one of my practice that I do is that, like, I think it was about a few weeks ago, I was just kind of wrestling, and especially as leaders, as responsible people, you're responsible for many things. And so what the practice that I do is I go through Psalm 23 and I just go, the Lord is my shepherd and I shall not be in want. And so the paraphrase prayer that I use is that my life is under the care of somebody else. And that's the Lord. And because of that, I don't have to carry the weight of the world on my shoulder. They are his. Then I start processing through mentally. I just go, what weight am I carrying that I should not be carrying? I should not be carrying the outcome of a decision that I need to make. I should not be caring about, how my kids are going to turn out, even though I try my best with my parenting. I can't carry that. And then so all of a sudden you begin to lay it out. And that's how you don't get just the practical Sabbath. you get the internal Sabbath that actually Jesus talks about.
Mm.
Yeah. I shall not be in want, you know, so it's like there's not a moment where the sufficiency of God is not enough, you know, and to actually practically do a practice to deal with the heart so that your heart can set the boundary, can be free to set the boundary.
Yeah. We're getting a few comments on like knowing your strengths and limitations, and knowing your boundaries is important, and also knowing other people's boundaries. But this second bit, knowing other people's capacity when you work as a team, that's really insightful. Obviously, knowing your own capacity is invaluable, but also being aware of the capacity of the people around you and what you're sort of putting on them. Yeah, that's a really, really good insight.
It's great. Okay. I think we'll handball it back to Danny. So what he's going to do is going to share a little bit more just around the practicalities of how to have the conversation. And after that, we'll go into Q&A. Yeah. So yeah, thanks, Danny.
Thanks for everyone. And yeah, I guess some of this has come from, I guess, my own personal experience as well, and being able to having to deal with issues of identity and how I see my worth as a person, as a Christian, and being part of a church community, and you know, things like, you know, our status and reputation, and all that really kind of is underpinning the things that can make it challenging for us to put the things that we know are important in terms of the self-care boundaries and so forth. The next bit is going to be a bit more focused on some of the, how do we actually have a conversation with somebody who might be struggling with a mental health difficulty or challenge? How do we set it up? How do we perhaps actually have those conversations? How do we manage ourselves? And I've come up with, I guess, a simple 8-tip kind of list in terms of helping us to think about some of the things that we can actually do practically. When we the first point is actually staying calm, which is kind of like very obvious, but often the most obvious thing is sometimes the thing that we miss the most. So when we have conversations about mental health, sometimes we can, sometimes we can be kind of, we feel like we're derailed by things we don't know, things that might be very concerning and worrying, like suicide or self-harm, or you know, symptoms and problems or medical conditions that we don't feel equipped to deal with, or that it might generate a lot of concern and worry. The first thing to do is actually to stop and to stay calm. Often when we don't know what to do, doing nothing is actually better than rushing into doing something that may not be helpful. So staying calm, managing when someone else that we are supporting is distressed and anxious, our job is to actually be that kind of solid foundation for them, and obviously be able to acknowledge their emotions, but not actually join them in the panic or distress or worry. The analogy that comes to mind would be something along the lines like, you know, if somebody is on a boat and on a lake, and they're falling off the boat, and they're kind of drowning and trying to swim to shore, and they are swimming to shore. Sometimes it can be unproductive to jump in and join in and drown together with that person. So staying on the bank and encouraging them and staying calm and being quite positive, it's really quite helpful. The second point, in terms of what helps to host a conversation, or in terms of a response to a conversation about mental health, is to spend more time listening than giving advice. Often when people have issues that are, you know, problems around emotions and difficulties, we can be very we're a very doing kind of society. So I think when somebody sees a problem, we jump in to try and solve the problem. And obviously, there may be things that are practical that we need to solve, but more than not, when someone is struggling to know what to do with their mental health, their emotional health, what's actually most important is for them to feel that someone is hearing them. And that goes back to my other point around communication, feeling that they belong, and feeling valued, and feeling dignity, to have somebody listen. sometimes when and then when the time is right, then being able to perhaps problem solve or offer advice. But when we jump in without listening, it can actually make someone feel small, feel criticized, even though they might be done with the best of intention. So really, just stopping to listen. The third point was really in terms of keeping cool. Sort of a bit of an overlap with the staying calm, but really being able to have that conversation and staying cool. So we've first of all stopped and not panic and join in with the chaos and distress. We've spent some time actively listening to the situation, and as we listen, to continue managing our own emotions. So first of all, we're not reacting. The second thing we need to do is constantly be monitoring our own bodies and our own minds. Is my heart racing very quickly? Am I panicking and getting sweaty? Am I getting restless? Do I feel compelled to do something? So constantly being able to keeping your cool is about monitoring your both your physical and emotional state along that journey of having that conversation and that active listening, because that's an active process that needs to keep continuing. The fourth thing is about kind of sometimes actually needing to offer practical support, and sometimes being able to help them to. There may be things that might be helpful within the different range of different challenges and problems, trying to work out where is it that you might be listening, and are there things that you might be able to do at a very practical level. So for example, maybe having a coffee with that person, just helping them with their shopping, or doing some very practical things rather than necessarily trying to deal with the entirety of the problem. So trying to work out what is it that you can help with, what is it that you may not, and then focus on what actually you might be able to do and support them in that way. And number 5, be sensitive. So as we listen, being quite careful about the material that's being shared, and obviously not jumping to giving advice, but also being quite thoughtful about what is shared to other people, because clearly someone may have come to you to talk about their mental health concerns or worries. And the reason that they do that is because they actually trust you. There's some sense of trust there, and being sensitive around how we manage these conversations, it's really important, particularly in a church community that it's actually very difficult to stay anonymous, to be honest. We know when sometimes we share a testimony or share a story. It's really important to kind of be quite careful about the anonymity of the person if they don't want that information shared, and what's actually being reflected and portrayed. So just being really mindful about that and how we share third-hand information. Sometimes we think, oh, I'm not mentioning the person's name, but when we share the issue to somebody else, it can actually be quite tricky. So just being very sensitive about that. Number 6, create opportunities. So it's really important that there are regular opportunities for us to have all sorts of conversations. So whether it is our weekly or fortnightly connect group, live group, church events, catch ups with people, having conversations with people on a regular basis, so that the conversation that we have around the mental health is not the first conversation we've had with that person. So we need a foundation or basis of regular connection and conversations about all sorts of different things that helps us to build relationship and trust, so that then when we have more challenging conversations, it's built on a platform of relationship and trust that comes from regular opportunities to be able to have these conversations. And number 7, you might be surprised that when you're supporting someone, you can actually learn a lot from that person that's sharing about their difficulty and worries. So don't assume that it's a one-way relationship where you are there to help that person. You might be surprised that sometimes when people go through very significant challenges, if we take time to listen and to sit with them, you might be surprised at what you might be able to learn from them. That includes, for parents supporting teenagers or young people. Sometimes we feel like parents should have all the answers and you need to give advice to your teenagers, but you might be surprised at what you might be able to learn from that person's experience that helps yourself, helps to kind of help someone else, or be able to kind of workshop that together. So really be prepared to learn new ideas and things. And lastly, offer to find help and support if you're not able to manage this yourself, and being able to perhaps escalate it within your leadership structures or pastoral care structures, or even getting help through a professional, as what I indicated through the pyramid, the green and yellow kind of zone. And there may be times that we may be called upon to actually call emergency services when someone's life is at risk, or there's an issue about safety that may arise because of mental health concerns. So even kind of going to the red zone as well. Hopefully that doesn't happen very often, but just be mindful that we need to create a boundary of safety for everyone. Some areas of getting help. So apart from your usual pastoral care supports, Lifeline has a 24/7 crisis line, as well as a text message service that isn't that it's not 24 hours, but a phone call is 24 hours, 131114. It's really important that everybody is aware of this service. Now, the people who are in Lifeline are actually trained volunteers. They're not mental health professionals like myself. They're perhaps quite similar to all of you, but perhaps had some additional training about how to deal with the immediate crisis. And then they might provide that phone support, and also maybe link people up to some additional supports as well. So that's not the referral pathway to get professional mental health support. It is a crisis support lifeline, and maybe sometimes encouraging people to access that when they need to, rather than assuming that the church can provide a 24/7 crisis line. And then the next step really is around looking at getting some professional mental health support. So we're quite blessed in Australia to have a fairly well-resourced universal healthcare system. Obviously, there are gaps, and there's no system that's perfect, and we can always do better. But in comparison to other high-income countries compared to the United States, America, Australia does have fairly good resources, and the government has recently been kind of increasing more supports in the area of mental health. Sometimes when we try and get help, the help may not be ideal, or things don't work out. It's important not to give up after the first attempt, encouraging people, if they had a not so great experience getting help, not to assume that all the help is like that, to not give up. And it may be that they have to try a second or third time to get the right help that they might need. So it's obviously acknowledging that there is actually a really good system in place. It's not perfect, but not to give up, even though things may not work out the first time, or things that doesn't fit that person. One of the challenges I think for Christians is that I get a lot of requests for people looking for a Christian mental health professional. Obviously, it's great if you can find someone that fits your values and ideas, and that works well for you, but it's more important to get the right help rather than the perfect help. So I use this analogy about kind of reaching out for help and getting started with the help rather than trying to find the right help. If you're falling off the boat and you need a life jacket, you're not going to worry about the size and the color and the fit. You just really want a life jacket. And so really reaching out for help, not being too pedantic or too perfectionistic in terms of what that help is exactly. And also just as a bit of a caveat, that just because somebody is a Christian, it does not automatically make them a good mental health professional. If you're looking for somebody with trained clinical skills, you want to look at their ability to help that person for their difficulty and challenge, as well as perhaps their values. So the pathway for most people would be through their GP who can make a referral through the Medicare system, through a psychologist or a psychiatrist. And I think recently the government's announced an increase in the number of sessions you can access for psychological interventions, up to 20 sessions in a year, which is pretty significant. For people aged 12 to 25, you can go online or contact your local Headspace center. There is a Headspace center in every area in Melbourne to be able to access youth mental health support for young people as well. Also, all schools have a well-being coordinator that can actually help navigate that process too. So reaching out to your local school can be an option for children in primary school and in high school as well. So these are some examples of ways so we can get help and how we perhaps can help facilitate that support.
Thank you very much for that, Dr. Denny. I really do appreciate that. As you can see, there's a whole lot of questions coming through. And to me, that's actually a really good sign. And it's not because you are not answering questions, it's because you are actually provoking a whole lot of thought. I've been in a lot of Zoom sessions when it's question and answer time and nothing pops up. And that's because I feel like people probably aren't engaging. Whereas at the moment, I'm struggling to read through all the questions because people are really interested in what you have to say and are finding what you're sharing really helpful. So we're just going to go through a couple of the questions now. And I do apologize to everyone that we probably won't get through every question, but we are going to try and do our best to sort through the ones that we can. But I might kick it off with a question that we actually had sent in prior to the session starting. And it was around the area of boundaries and how do we actually set boundaries, the way the question is phrased. Other than telling people the rules up front, up to their face, what are some of the best ways to tell people about boundaries? And also, what do we do if they ignore them? And I guess maybe the thing behind that question is sometimes it feels a bit rude to set hard and fast boundaries with people, like, hey, you can only talk to me right now, and we'll only talk about this, and you only have this amount of time to talk, and I'm going to stop, connecting with you if you don't do this, this, this. Like, how do we actually maybe go about setting boundaries in a healthy way? And then also, what do we do if boundaries start to get pushed or ignored?
Yeah, that's a great point. I think it's really important that we are not rigid in boundaries. Rigid boundaries are having rigid boundaries is as unhelpful as having no boundaries. So it's really about boundaries that exist in a context of a healthy relationship. Things, what helps is to be able to understand roles. So for example, it's really important that when we, perhaps set up that relationship in the first place to be able to kind of qualify that. Obviously, you don't want to give people a 2-page contract with disclaimers and before you started having a conversation, because that's not helpful.
That's how all of my friendships start, is with a signed contract.
I haven't read your booklet yet, but or your encyclopedia, but I'll start working on that. It's really about being able to, you need to be able to read the atmosphere as well, because we are dealing with emotions here and being sensitive. I guess it starts off with actually kind of understanding the role. Are you here to, what's your role in this perspective? Are we just hanging out? And and having in your mind be able to have some ideas about, well, where are some of those limits? So maybe in your mind making out some scenarios and even be able to talk through perhaps a mentor or someone to help you work out, okay, if this happened, would I be comfortable with that? What would I be comfortable with? And trying to work that out first, because I think it's important that you are quite clear about your boundaries entering into that role, that relationship. And then being able to explain to that person, in a very loving way. And I don't want to sound so stereotypical, but the love sandwich conversation is a really good, easy way to remember that you appreciate that the person has come to you with a very significant issue, and be able to acknowledge the positives of, we've developed some trust, you've opened up and told me, and then being quite transparent rather than actually telling the person, you should not talk to me about this problem. It's really important that we avoid telling people what to do, but actually come from a place of, what is it that you will do? So rather than say, you shouldn't talk to me about this problem, I can't deal with that, talk about, I would prefer if you had this conversation with someone else, or I don't feel equipped to deal with this problem. So rather than saying the person shouldn't talk to you, be true to your own vulnerabilities in saying, I actually feel a bit confused and overwhelmed in this situation, but I would really like to help you get the right help that you need, because I'm very concerned. So rather than setting boundaries where we tell people what they shouldn't do, really come from a place of vulnerability and be able to share that perhaps I'm feeling this, or, and giving people reason and a context helps to shape those difficult conversations.
Great. Yeah, thanks for that. I'm just really a bit conscious of time as well, so I do want to respect what we have actually said. So this is just a bit of my proposal. So Danny, I'm just wondering, would you be cool to hang back another 15 minutes, or if you have to go, that's
No, I'm flexible.
okay. Now, thank you for that. And so for the rest of us, I mean, our official finish time is 12:30, so we want to respect that. So if you need to go by 12:30, by all means, feel free. It won't be seen as rude or whatever. But what we'll do is we'll continue on until 12:45, and then we'll finish there with some of these questions because there's a lot of questions. And then there'll be a recording for this. So if you happen to miss out anyway, you can actually go back onto this. We'll find a way to actually get it out to you guys. Okay. So that way we can kind of find that happy balance in the middle. Okay. But thanks a lot, Danny. Just a second question around that. So thank you for the setting the boundary thing. I think that's really tricky when you're in it, right? I remember there was a guy who kept asking me, oh, I want to kill myself. He sent me at like 9:15 p.m. a text like multiple times, and I have to call up and go, call him up, but he wouldn't respond. And then 15, 20 minutes later, he'll eventually call and just keep silent on the phone. And I'm like, what do I do? How do I navigate that? And it became a repeated pattern. And I had to set the boundary of going, look, I'm here for you, but do you want to talk to me or do you need help? Because if you need help, I'm going to call the cat team. You know what I mean? And I felt bad if I called the cat team, it's going to affect our relationship, you know? But in that, my question is, it's really difficult. Where does our responsibility lie when we're trying to help someone with mental health? Because that's the stress around it. Like, what if I don't do this? This is going to happen. So one of the questions, where does the responsibility lie when you're trying to help someone with mental health? I feel the pressure to fix the person's situation.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that can be something massive to sit with. And this is something that I actually have to deal with in my work as well, because obviously there are times that I have to also escalate that support in terms of working out when some people might have to access emergency services or go to the hospital and so forth. And this is an issue that I often have to support the staff that I train at work and supervise too, in terms of how do you make that judgment call. So I think goes back to, first of all, knowing, if you're feeling overwhelmed. So in terms of supporting people, it's about a person supporting a person. There actually are no tricks. So if as a person supporting, you are feeling stressed, you're feeling worried and overwhelmed, that's a sign that you need to kind of get help from somewhere else. Because it's not actually about the strategy, it's about the person, because it's about a person supporting a person. The greatest resource in mental health is people, not the strategy and the tricks. So if as a person you're feeling overwhelmed, that in itself is a sign to kind of actually get the help. Sometimes it's really important. So maybe, sometimes you can read you can gauge the lay of the land in terms of what's helpful, maybe by trial and error. Maybe after the first time, you really want to set some clear limits around these are some crisis supports, and actually responding consistently around that. This is my role, this is the crisis supports. And then if this continues on or doesn't stop, it's important that you are confident and feel supported in being able to act on that. So I think another principle around that is to not deal with it in secret. Often someone might say, you might feel, yes, we want to be sensitive, but when it comes to issues that are quite severe, it's important not to be able to deal with it on your own. And particularly when things that involve risk or a situation where you've tried to set some boundaries and the person is not responding or it's not working, phone a friend, not just any friend, but maybe somebody who you trust and it's your mentor, and try and deal with that. And I'm just quoting scripture around the verse, when two or three are gathered in my name, I will be among them. It's not just about answered prayer, it's actually about the strength of unity, of people coming together to deal with difficult conversations, so that when two or three gather together, he is amongst us in that. So that context of that verse is around dealing with difficult behavior or challenging behavior in the church community. So being able to use that as strength in terms of dealing with situations where you might be getting exhausted, the boundaries, the usual strategies aren't working, and applying that principle there.
Yeah, so that's sort of like, I guess it's helping you become a bit self-aware of maybe unfair boundaries or unfair expectations being placed on you Like, so maybe people would say, I need to call you right now at 10 p.m. at night, or hey, if you share this with anyone, I'm going to hurt myself, or you're not allowed to do this, or you have to respond now. Like, it's a lot about you being aware of unfair boundaries being placed on you as well, is what I'm hearing.
Absolutely. And ultimately, we want to remain in a place of being helpful rather than get caught up about what's the right or wrong thing. Because if we remain helpful, then that's always the right thing, really, rather than having a right or wrong to it. And if we are feeling exhausted, overwhelmed, our boundaries are being violated, we feel blackmailed, we feel constrained in what we're doing, then actually we're not coming from a place that's being helpful. So I guess the general expectation is that people who are perhaps feeling suicidal, having issues about risk, they should really be seeking additional professional help as well as pastoral care, because I think they're also going through a lot of other issues. It's not one or the other, but I think, when it comes to situations like Pastor Cheah was saying around almost involving the CAT team, it's important that everybody has a consistent message and approach to it. Otherwise, what will happen is one person sets a healthy boundary, and then the person goes to another pastor or another leader. And so I think as a church community, it's important to be consistent in our approach. Obviously, we can't be rigid, as I said, but just having some general consistent principles around recognizing that acute mental health issues need to go to a crisis support system like Lifeline or through the mental health system.
Well, that's fantastic. It's such a great principle that we as people helping, we're the greatest resource. And there isn't so much strategies or methodology. The how-to around some of these, gray zone is really self-awareness about who we are, what's driving us, our decision-making, what's happening on the other side, and then working out what works between that particular relationship and situation, isn't it? Yeah. I think that's great. So I just want to actually say, especially for us as Clayton Church, right? Do not overpromise confidentiality. Yeah. Especially in particular areas like this where there may be harm and risk, right? When someone goes, oh, I'll only tell you, promise if you don't tell anyone, right? I can't promise that. Like, you just don't even know what they're going to say. So, and number two, do share it with others, as Danny has shared, because if you had that thing to carry all by yourself and you're locked in and trapped, it's a very heavy burden to carry. And number three, if you want to report upwards, okay? Don't report sideways. So share upwards to your zone leader, share upwards to your pastoral, pastor, in charge or whatever. That way, then we can respect and treat people's dignity and information in the appropriate way. Okay. Now, in light of that, Danny, one of the key questions was this around that. Sometimes we can try and help people, but what if the person is not self-aware? What if the person doesn't want to seek professional help? What if the person you're trying to support is just not listening to your advice, but yet just keeps turning to you for more and more advice? That's one of the questions. So how do you deal with that?
Look, that's probably the most common situation that you'd probably face, and the most common question that I would get. We know that 2/3 of people who have mental health challenges actually don't seek help from a professional for lots of different reasons around stigma. One of the most common reasons why people might be worried about getting mental health support or help is actually fear. So it's important not to think about them as being difficult. People not wanting help because they're difficult or they're stubborn, and just being able to come from a lens that this person is terrified and afraid or ashamed. So if we're able to have that lens in approaching that problem, we may be able to have a different kind of conversation with that. And as with the iceberg thing, so the thing on the surface is the person's refusing to get help. The feelings that's underneath that behavior of refusing to get help is this idea of feeling terrified and ashamed. And so dealing with the fear and stigma and shame is at a number of different levels. One, the fact that as a church community, you're talking about mental health openly, you're training everyone, that in itself reduces the fear and stigma around it, that makes it okay. And also having people who have had their own journey through mental health and recover and be able to speak up on that helps to reduce the stigma and fear around that. And the third thing at an individual level is actually to be able to at some point recognize and give that feedback and be able to say, no, I've been encouraging you to get help for quite some time, rather than kind of go, why aren't you doing it? To actually kind of go, look, I appreciate that sometimes people might actually feel quite scared and afraid. What can I do to help you with your fear, rather than deal with the refusal to get help? Now, the other point also is sometimes if the person is communicating with you about all their mental health needs, even they're not necessarily improving or getting anywhere, their needs are getting met somehow. So if we don't set healthy boundaries, it does not set up a very good motivator for somebody to actually go and seek the professional help, because their needs are partially met through that green level support. So the purpose of having healthy boundaries is to kind of actually set that expectation that, I'm helping you with this bit, but that bit of your life isn't actually kind of being dealt with, and this is why you need to get that professional help. And so setting the boundaries would also help to encourage, because sometimes we feel like we're stuck with a problem and the person isn't necessarily going to the right supports to keep coming back, but also there are things that we do unconsciously that's actually fostering that. Often it's about lack of clarity around roles and that boundaries that we talked about earlier.
So if I was to put it really blunt, like really black and white, a lot of this like gray zone area, it's really up to us as the carer, so to speak, to take the lead in all this.
Yeah, so I think there are things like the issues where someone's life is at risk. Really, I think it's a very clear thing that you have to get professional help or seek appropriate services. And then there are things that you decide as a group, and and what I heard was the expectation that you don't expect your volunteers to actually be counseling people and providing untrained mental health support. And then the other bit that's a bit more gray, that's the bit that's a bit kind of gray, I guess. So it does revolve around the person's capacity. It will vary a little bit, but you don't want to have too much variability such that it becomes so inconsistent because everyone's so different. I think there was a question in the chat group by somebody who said he's a GP and also a life group leader, and how does he set those boundaries? So I guess being able to be quite clear about what is your role in that relationship, in that context, and trying to be as clear as possible, and somehow kind of switching away from your medical hat. So even I deliberately don't lead a life group for some of the reasons that I said. I do have other people in my church community that come to me to ask for advice. I will have a conversation, and then that conversation involves putting all the things in place that I spoke about earlier with those 8 tips: listen, support, and actually really kind of acknowledge and listen, but also actively encourage them to get the help that they need and explain to them why. One of the things to keep in mind is that when sometimes it may be helpful for people to access professional mental health support externally with a professional for these reasons. It's a very close community as a church, and you want to be able to maintain those relationships. There are times when people recover. Sometimes people may, share a lot of personal details when they're distressed. When they've overcome that challenge, they actually might regret who they've told all their stories to. And then if the people that they told all their stories to is their closest green zone relationships, it can be really difficult to stay in the same church and community at the point of recovery, because there are different motivators at different times in terms of what encourages someone to share. So I think sometimes being able to set those boundaries helps to protect that person's dignity to be able to then maintain future relationships, so that you can stay in the community at a point of recovery without having to kind of lose face or feel like you regret sharing your personal stories to everybody, because sometimes at a point of distress, you're not necessarily making the best judgments or decisions.
Yeah, thank you for that.
And the other thing from a personal point of view, sometimes in my life group, in a Connect group, people ask for prayer requests, and I start giving them advice as a doctor. And I actually realized the person asked for prayer. They didn't ask for a doctor's advice, because otherwise they can go and see their GP for it. So it's really important to maybe kind of, if you're a health professional here, or have other expert skills in different areas, to be able to, be clear about your role in that context.
Yeah, thank you very much, Dr. Danny. Yeah, we're getting an awful lot of questions about, I guess, boundaries and knowing where to set things and where to cut things off and where to allow things and whatnot. And I've found, just personally for me, listening to you has been really helpful. But something that I often try and practice with people when I'm going into a relationship, knowing that it's sort of going to be a bit one way, is that I've often asked some questions of what they expect from this relationship. Like, I'll be like, what are you actually wanting from me? Or I'll be like, hey, if I am able to listen and speak, what should I expect that you will do? And sort of actually get them to answer some of these questions. Sometimes when I'm having healthy disagreements online, I'll ask someone like, hey, if I'm able to actually show you that you're wrong, would that change your mind? And sometimes they'll say no. And I was like, cool. Well, there's no point in us taking this any further. Or like, so I think sometimes setting up these questions to actually gauge what they want from the situation is also a really way to sort of help set some of the boundaries. Now, I'm mindful of time, and so there's probably just maybe one question that we might want to finish on now, and that is, what are some early signs of children or young people struggling with mental health? I know a lot of the people here have kids, and there's also kids church leaders and youth leaders in this Zoom session at the moment. But yeah, what would be some early signs of children that are struggling with mental health?
Look, I think there's that might be a whole even another seminar, but in terms of generally, applying some of the principles that I spoke to earlier around thinking, behavior, and feeling, and impacting on your functioning. Ability to actually kind of manage school. So typically, a lot of kids struggle to attend school, or might feel anxious about going to school, might look quite withdrawn, and also perhaps a significant change in their behavior. I guess we expect perhaps transient issues during different stages of development and stress, and that's actually quite normal as well as part of development. But I guess when there's persistence, and also when there's concerns that are quite enduring and it's been going on for quite some time, and also you're seeing it in multiple contexts, so it's not just in this particular situation, you're seeing it in multiple situations. So I guess a simple principle would be to look at the pervasive nature of it. So is it happening in one or multiple settings? Is this kind of enduring? Is this happening just in this particular point? For example, a lot of kids have been, in remote learning, and then now we're moving to kind of attending in person, and maybe getting to school might be a bit tricky. So we need to put in a transition support for kids. That's going to be pretty normal. But if it's an enduring problem and you're finding that you're going to school is a continual battle, it's important to kind of seek help. Generally, the schools are generally quite good in terms of well-being support. So if you're feeling a bit unsure, actually have to go and talk to the well-being coordinator or the year coordinator of your child's class, and be able to, they're not going to give you all the answers, but even chatting that through and having a conversation would be a good step. I think particularly for school-age students, the school supports often is one way to kind of do that. And a lot of schools also have in-house, in-school supports. There are also mental health in schools programs being rolled out across the state as well, definitely in the metro Melbourne. So that certainly kind of having that conversation with the school would be a good way to try and work out exactly what are next steps, apart from the general principles that I've spoken about. And also, we have very good GPs in Australia, in Melbourne, and being able to have that conversation too would be around those specific concerns, because they can then screen for more specific issues and ask more specific details rather than work on general principles.
Great.
Thank you. We really do appreciate that, Dr. Danny. It's been an incredible help. And yeah, we do just want to really thank you for being so generous with your time and also your knowledge. It's been invaluable to us. I just want to maybe just finish off by saying a couple of things, and then we might go. We were going to finish with a poll, but we were going to skip that, and we might actually just email that out at the moment, which is just a bit of a poll to say, hey, I hope you found this helpful. If so, why was it helpful? And maybe what are some other things that you would like help in? And the reason that we are interested in this, and the reason that we're doing things like this with Dr. Danny is, even just today, I was reading an article by Kerry Newhoff, and he's like a church growth guru, genius extraordinaire. And he said, one of the biggest things that will stunt a church's growth is their pastoral care. And that is because churches will get to a size when the pastor, like the sole senior pastor, can't pastorally care for everyone. And he said there's two issues, and it is a pastor won't let go of that pastoral care handle, or the church themselves won't let go of the pastor. Everyone wants to be pastorally cared by the pastor themselves, or the pastor wants to pastorally care by everyone. And they said that's the biggest stunt of church growth. And so what we are trying to do is say, we are actually releasing and empowering you guys to help our church grow by not holding on to that model anymore. And in order to do that, we want to make sure that you actually feel equipped and empowered to pastorally care for people, because we want to spread the influence and the wealth of this community around so that people around us can flourish. We don't want to be stunted by this fixation on just say the senior pastor doing everything. But yeah, we feel then burdened to make sure that we are equipping you as leaders of groups and gatherings to be able to care for people under you. So we really do hope that you are finding this helpful. And we do welcome any and all feedback as well, because we want to make sure that we are actually targeting areas that you guys are feeling the need in, because you'll see that more closely than we will. So I might actually just pray for you all now, if that's okay. Nobody's going to say no to that, I'm sure. But I might just pray for you guys now before we sort of say our final goodbye. Heavenly Father, we just want to thank you for this time together. We want to thank you for this whole Sunday, the blessing that it has been. That we had a wonderful prayer at 9 a.m. Led by Pastor Greg. That was fantastic. And also the message that we got to hear from Sharon and the worship that we had today during the service was really, really uplifting and encouraging and convicting. And then also being able to hear from Dr. Danny here, I've just found it so valuable and so helpful. Lord, we want to be a people that is resourceful and helpful to the community around us. We don't want to be so insular that we are just so dependent on just like one person to minister to everyone, but we actually want to lift the floor, raise the floor of everyone's abilities and skills to be able to minister and share like this holistic, flourishing life to everyone around us. Father, I just pray that we will continue to look for ways to equip ourselves to care for the people around us, to upskill ourselves, and to reach more and more people with this changing knowledge of the gospel and this God that is changing people's lives. I'm praying for a real blessing of the Spirit on all of the groups that are represented here by all the various leaders. Lord, we really do trust that we are seeking you in all of this, that we are listening for your voice, that we are following in your footsteps where you are leading. And Lord, we are just excited for where you are going to take Clayton community and what you are going to do with your people here. So we thank you once again for all of this. We thank you for Dr. Danny and the way that he has worked so hard to become such a valuable person in your faith community and in Melbourne. We pray a great blessing on his life as well. That he'll be invited to many women's events in the future as well. We're praying for that blessing in your mighty and precious name. Amen.
Amen.
Well, very funny, Pastor Carl.